Hello folks, today we're going to be doing part 2 of the review of the Vulcan MIGMAX 215 from Harbor Freight. I've done a little bit of welding with it so far, but in this video I'm going to show some of the welding. We're going to do some more welding. I'll give some of my thoughts and impressions on how the machine works and what I think of it. Before we get to the welding, I'll just go over a few simple things that I discovered in my time with it so far. The fan does run all the time. Not a big deal, it's not super loud or obnoxious, and I think that's a pretty fair cost savings trade-off because not having a fan on demand feature doesn't affect operation. It's just a convenience thing. The noise of the fan. So, not too bad. When you are welding in synergic mode, it has recommended thickness ranges for each of the 3 wire sizes that you have on the synergic knob here. And if you get outside of that recommended range, this little blue synergic light will flash and it actually will not let you weld. So just something to keep in mind if you, if you have it in synergic setting and you're trying to weld and it's not, just make sure this light isn't flashing, indicating you're outside of the recommended range. Also, when in synergic mode, this knob is not infinitely variable. From my experience, it is just stepped according to the thickness gauges here. So for instance, if you're in the setting for 1/8 of an inch thick material and it's welding a little bit hot and you start adjusting it down, it doesn't actually make a difference until you get to 14 gauge, and then it steps it down to the next setting. So it just seems like there's individual programs for each of the thickness settings, but not an infinitely variable setting. So just something to keep in mind. In manual mode, you do have more precise control over fine-tuning wire feed speed and voltage. So anyway, just a few things I noticed. Now let's get to doing some more welding and show some arc shots and show some results. See how it does. Alright, so here's a selection of the joints I welded up with flux core wire. It runs flux core pretty well. I'm actually surprised at the lack of spatter. I have one other flux core wire welder and it produces quite a bit more spatter than this one, so that's nice. I did find that the synergic settings for flux core tended to run a tiny bit on the hot side with most joint settings on the 1/8 inch and thinner material. Thicker than that, it seemed to do a lot better. Just because of that stepped setting on the knob, it was a lot easier to get it dialed in perfectly on manual mode. So that's just something to keep in mind. The synergic settings work good enough, so not too bad, but I definitely found I was able to get it dialed in a little bit better to my taste in manual mode. I did run the included Vulcan branded 030 flux core wire, but I also ran some Lincoln NR211 035 wire that I had on hand, and I actually preferred the way the Lincoln wire ran quite a bit. The Vulcan wire seems to have a very thin layer of flux or slag after the weld, and a lot of times I found it didn't fully cover the weld, and so you got kind of a dirtier, more oxidized looking weld whereas the Lincoln wire just seemed to come out a little bit better overall. But honestly, one of the biggest differences I noticed was with tacking. Tacks with the Vulcan wire just really didn't come out very nice generally. See, here's a tack. You can see it's really porous and chunky, and I actually didn't even clean this, so you can see there's really no flux on it. The flux pretty much was just non-existent. Pretty nasty looking. This one looks a little bit better, but still around the edges you can see it's kind of crusty and kind of porous. Now unfortunately I don't have any examples of the Lincoln wire tacks out here, but they all pretty much seemed smooth, shiny, nice solid tacks, so it just seemed like it worked a little better for that. On thicker wire, the synergic settings seem to work a little bit better. It still goes in good and hot, but it's not as big of an issue on thicker material. It seems a little bit easier to run nice and hot on thicker stuff. Here's some 2-inch 3/16 wall tubing, and this was run at the 3/16 synergic setting. Again, ignore my kind of sloppy technique there, but it laid in good and hot, burnt in real nice, and it actually went pretty well. Again, this was the Lincoln wire. Note that just the lack of spatter. I mean, there's just a couple little BBs here and there, but just very little spatter. So that's pretty nice. I was pretty pleased with that. Out of all of that, no hiccups with the welder. Everything ran fine. No problems at all so far. So now I have the machine switched over to MIG. We'll start with 023 solid wire. Weld up a few things. I have some more just odds and ends of bits and pieces to make some test joints. And then I also have a small project in mind that I've been wanting to do anyways, so I'm going to go ahead and do it with this welder, show it, see how it goes. Alright, using a couple different sizes of solid core wire and C25 gas. I've done some MIG welding with the machine now. Welded up some various odds and ends. Different thicknesses. Just a random selection of things. So far so good. Now I have a little project to do. I got the materials sitting out here for it. Very simple project. Not much to it, just a few welds really, but even still, it's kind of a real-world project versus just kind of throwing all this stuff together. So I'm going to get started, get everything cut, and get all the pieces ready to go and weld it up. Alright, so what I'm making is actually a grill grate holder for my fire pit. I got the ring that will hold the grill grate itself bent just by hand. It's pretty rough, but it's good enough. and I'm going to get it tacked up. I got it clamped together right now. I'll get that tacked up and we'll go from there. Alright, I got the ring welded out. I got 4 tabs welded on the inside to hold the grill. So the next thing I have to do is cut out and weld on the feet. Alright, so the project's all finished. Pretty simple, easy project, but just wanted to actually get something done that I've been wanting to do with the welder rather than just weld up sample pieces. And so there it is, just a little ring of metal with some feet on it and some little tabs to hold the grill grate. And that's just a 22-inch replacement grill grate for a Weber grill. And it's all welded up and it's good to go. Alright, so here we are, finished up the testing with the welder. And I gotta say, I had no problems with it at all. Everything on the welder functioned fine. The included regulator worked fine. It was easy to set. It held its setting well throughout all the testing without any issues. I did run with the regulator showing about 25 CFH while welding. I read a little bit higher than that while not welding because it's really just a pressure gauge, not so much a flow gauge. I was reading about maybe 28 to 30 just at the resting state. While welding, while the gas was flowing, it was showing about 25. And I had no problem with that setting for all of my testing. Now I did do some testing and verified that these synergic settings are stepped. So when set anywhere kind of in the whole range of 1/8 of an inch, it had a set speed and output, and then when you got past a certain point, it stepped down dramatically to a different wire feed speed setting. So they are kind of a stepped setting, so just something to be aware of. I did find with the solid MIG wire, the ER70S6 that I ran, both with 025 and the 030 wire, the synergic settings did work a little bit more consistently than they did with the Flux core. Now, I didn't show the manual last time, but I said I would show it if there was anything special about it. It's not super special, but it is a pretty good manual. It seems to be well written. It's easy to understand, easy to follow, has nice illustrations all the way through. Very good descriptions of operation, of troubleshooting, features, controls, all of that, and even shows technique for welding and different, some troubleshooting, some diagnosis of your welds to see how they go. So, pretty good manual. No issues at all with the gun, worked just fine, had 0 problems with the trigger. Everything worked flawlessly, no hiccups, no issues at all. The nozzle is rattly, and you can see it also kind of has a tendency to get a little bit off center because it can flop around a little bit. But honestly, in operation, it never really bothered me, and I never noticed any issues. And I'm sure it may get worse with time, but I found that the nozzle shed spatter very well, even up inside. I mean, you could brush any kind of a spatter, any kind of a buildup right off of it. So that all worked pretty well. The wire feed mechanism functioned without any issues with all of the different wires I put through it. 030 and 035 flux core, 023 and 030 solid wire. All of them fed fine, no issues at all. The cold wire feed switch inside works great for feeding new wire through the gun. It made changing the wires that much easier and very fast. The full process of changing wire was very easy. You just loosen that knob that I showed, flip the drive roll if needed, pop the new spool on, get it started, close it, hit the wire feed switch, and you're ready to go. So I changed wires many times during the testing, just kind of going back and forth, trying different things, and very easy process, no problems at all. I did run the welder on both 120 and 240 using the included power cords, and I had no problems at all. It would run right up to the recommended settings on 120 without any issues. And same on 240 with the included cords. I didn't have any kind of problems or notice any kind of lack of power, any stuttering, any kind of issues at all running with the included cords. I think that at the 10-foot length, the 14 gauge isn't really hurting you much. So like I said, I didn't have any issues. I didn't test voltage drop or anything, but as far as just functionally, operation of the welder wise, I didn't have any issues at all. Now I did make a new longer power cord just because I wanted a 20-foot power cord. The 10-foot isn't long enough to really reach very far outside of my garage. When I'm doing flux core welding, I don't really like to smoke up the garage. I like to do it out in the driveway. So I did buy some 10-3 SO cord at the local hardware and a couple of ends, made myself up a 20-foot power cord, and worked great, had no issues. And I did run, like I said, a 10-3, so it was a 10 gauge wire. And I did go with the 10 gauge just because I was going with the longer length. Now in terms of long-term reliability, I can't say. I've only had it for about a week and really only used it hard for a day and a half or so. so I can't say how well it's going to hold up long term. But during the time I've used it, it's been totally problem free. I don't really feel like you're giving up a lot in terms of performance or features versus a more expensive welder. It seems to work fine. It does come with a 1-year warranty through Harbor Freight. Just make sure you hang on to your receipt in case you do have any problems. They do offer a 2 and 3 year extended warranty, which basically it adds either 1 or 2 years to the 1-year included warranty. So that's an improvement over what Harbor Freight used to offer in the past. So I gotta say, for the money, it seems like a pretty good welder. I'll update if I have any issues or if anything comes up that makes me change my mind. But at this point, I'm gonna give it a thumbs up. Good features, good performance, no issues that I came across, no odd quirks or problems. So I'm sure I'm forgetting some things. If you have any questions, post them up down below and I'll answer if I can. If I do any interesting projects with the welder coming up, maybe I'll make a video just kind of show how it's going. But until then, thank you for watching. Take care.